Hi, welcome back to my channel. The Way of Kings is a 2010 fantasy novel by best-selling author and certified writing machine Brandon Sanderson. If you don't know Brandon Sanderson, he's an interesting guy. For starters, he is a serious contender for the best-selling fantasy author alive. To get an idea of just how popular he is, take a look at this Kickstarter he did to raise money for 4 secret books he'd been working on, and he raised $41 million. One thing I personally really like about Sanderson is that he gives university lectures on writing in America, and he puts the lectures up for free on YouTube. I'd recommend them. I think they're an entertaining watch and especially informative if you're considering writing a fantasy or you want to be a professional fantasy writer. I bring this up because I watched him talk about this book, The Way of Kings, specifically in a lecture, and I can't find the clip, but he said something to the effect of he'd been going through a period where publishers didn't quite know what to do with him, how to position him. Grimdark was the popular genre at the time, and he tried to write it, but his Grimdark always ended up kind of hopeful, and after he got one rejection too many, he had a kind of moment and just said, right, well, if no one's gonna go for my stuff, I'm just gonna write the most epic, hopeful fantasy I can, and he did, and that book's The Way of Kings, and it's widely considered to be his magnum opus. The Way of Kings is the first book in the Stormlight Archive series, which now I believe has 5 novels and 2 novellas. It's also one of the most popular and highly rated fantasy novels of all time, and it has no swearing, no sex scenes, no smut, and very little in the way of romance, actually. And that's quite interesting when you consider the huge popularity of romancy at the moment. Clearly, there is room for other kinds of fantasy books. The book's popularity is also especially impressive when you consider that this fantasy novel has no television adaptation and no movies, despite multiple people reaching out to Sanderson trying to create deals. He's said he feels the timing isn't right yet. But to me, that just further highlights how successful this book has been. Anyway, onto the book itself. This truly is epic fantasy. It contains a prelude, a prologue, 75 chapters, 9 interludes, and an epilogue. It's told from multiple POVs across multiple time periods and locations. It has 1008 pages. It's 383,000 words long. And just for some context there, I'll add that a standard Bible usually has 1,200 to 1,500 pages, so Sanderson's work is almost biblical in length. In terms of awards, it's won a couple, but not nearly as many as I was expecting going into researching this review. So it won Whitney Awards in 2010 for Best Novel of the Year and Best Speculative Fiction. It won a David Gemmell Legend Award in 2011, and that's it. It was nominated for a Goodreads Choice Award, but it didn't win. So that's quite interesting to me, considering how much people rave about this book, the reputation it has, and how highly recommended it is. It's constantly appeared on the New York Times bestseller list. It's sold over 10 million copies, and it has a 4.67 rating on Goodreads. And I know you take Goodreads with a pinch of salt, but I think if you've spent some time in the fantasy space, you look at online discussions about this book, this is a beloved novel. As I said at the top, Brandon Sanderson is something of a writing machine. He writes 3,000 words a day. He's put out 71 books, and it's probably 72 now. I've taken a week to edit this video, and out of all of those books, I've read that this one is considered his magnum opus. So I was really excited to dive into this one. This is my first Brandon Sanderson novel, and I did really enjoy it. You might wonder, if you're familiar with Sanderson's many works, why I decided to jump into this one and not start with something like Mistborn. And honestly, the reason for that is I read this as an audiobook. I got a free Audible credit, and I like to get my money's worth. So, and yes, I do count audiobooks as reading. You can debate with me about that if you like in the comments. But that said, I would like to get a physical copy. That's why I don't have a physical copy with me here today. And I'm sort of looking around at nice sets because I would like to keep going with the series and read a physical copy as well. So let me know in the comments if you've got any recommendations for what set I should get, especially since the series isn't complete yet. So the book is set in Brandon Sanderson's fantasy universe, and as far as I know, I think all his books are set within this universe called the Cosmere. This is in the world of Rashar. It's kind of a medieval sort of fantasy world as I see it, with like castles and strongholds and that kind of level of technology, although they do have some interesting technological devices, and magic does exist within this world. So the magic system is based around something called Stormlight, hence the Stormlight Archive. So that's literally like power that comes from storms, and you can harness it and wield it using contraptions called fabrials. You can also wield it if you have something called shard plate or a shard blade. So it's like a very powerful suit of armor that basically transforms you into a superhuman, so kind of like an Iron Man suit without the missiles, and an incredibly powerful blade that can basically cut through anything, that can be summoned from a distance and can disappear as well. And shard blades and shard plate are so sought after in this world. They are worth more than kingdoms, and pretty much the only way to get your hands on them now is to kill someone who is wearing them in combat, and that's really hard to do because they are basically a superhuman. They are basically a superhero. So you got to fight Superman one-on-one and beat him to get the shard plate or the shard blade. But some people still try it. That's a big draw for joining the army in this world, that you might get a chance to take on a shard bearer, at least for some people. There's also another kind of magic called lashing in this world, where you can basically control gravity and lash yourself to objects or lash other people to objects, and that is incredibly powerful and can turn you into kind of a one-man army. And all of this is explained very carefully in great detail in kind of almost like video game style terms. There is a lot of detailed world building in this book, and that's a real strength of Sanderson's, his the way he creates magic systems and the way he builds his worlds. We find out about food, religion, social structures. So there's a class structure based on eye color. We experience many different locations. The interludes really give us a wider view of the world from minor characters who we don't see the rest of the time. There's interesting creatures, including some magical creatures, and this world even has its own curse expressions like storm it if someone's pissed off. And Sanderson also includes serious and weighty topics like racism, slavery and suicide, which are all in this novel and all treated with a respectful hand. So all of this together really gives the impression that Sanderson has lavished a lot of time and care and thought on this world, and it makes the whole thing feel real and lived in. So the main characters of this novel, I would say, are Kaladin, Dalinar Kholin, Seth and Shalott. But I would say, minor spoiler here, that everything really ties back to Dalinar and his family. So this book is called The Way of Kings because Dalinar has become obsessed with a book called The Way of Kings, which he's been reading a lot, that talks about a different way of doing things, a different way of governing from long ago, which was more noble and honourable and has been lost. Dalinar is one of the most highly regarded people in the army, serving the king. They're fighting a war against some human-like people who have armour growing out of them called the Parshendi, and Dalinar does have a shard blade and a shard plate, so he's a very powerful warrior. Now this book has kind of a bad reputation among the king and the court because Dalinar's brother also became obsessed with this book shortly before he was assassinated by Seth, who we'll get onto, and that started the war with the Parshendi, and that's been going on for some time now, and Dalinar kind of wants to find a way to put an end to it. Kaladin is probably the standout character of the novel for me. He's also very popular from what I've seen online. He's brooding, dangerous, highly skilled, deeply distrustful of authority, and brooding. But he's also very honourable, very determined, and he has like a deep-seated desire to save people. He really can't bear losing anyone, which is obviously a bit difficult considering he's chosen the career of being a soldier, although he only did that to help his brother. So a large portion of the novel follows Kaladin's backstory and what's led him up to where he is now. He's not in a great spot now. He's fallen from grace, been discharged from the army, and has ended up a slave on a bridge crew, and their job is just to carry bridges for soldiers to walk over as they cross chasms. It's back-breaking work, and they are cannon fodder, except there are no cannons, they're arrow fodder in this world. And we find out how he went from being a highly respected, extremely capable commander in the army to someone completely disposable and not at all well thought of, a bridgeman who typically have the lifespan of a Spinal Tap drummer. And then most of his story is about how can he get himself out of this situation. One thing I really enjoyed about Kaladin's sections are the other characters he interacts with. So there's a windspren, which is a sort of fairy-like creature. I'm sorry, Brandon Sanderson fans, if that's not a very accurate description, called Syl, who follows Kaladin around. And typically windspren only cause mischief and don't really interact with people, but Syl starts talking to him, and that's quite mysterious. He also begins to make alliances and friends within the bridge crew, and eventually we get like a nice ragtag group of recruits all working together to try and find a way out of this situation. And I really enjoyed the interplay between all of them, and I'm a sucker for that ragtag group of heroes thing. So that was really enjoyable for me, these parts of the novel, even though there are some quite dark sections that do deal with depression and suicide, so just be aware of that going in. While all this is going on, Dalinar has started having visions to do with the book The Way of Kings from long ago, and his family is starting to think he's gone mad. On top of that, he's lost a lot of his memories, especially memories of his former wife. On top of that, a former ally of his now appears to be plotting against him, and on top of that, his brother's widow has returned, and they were in love once, but Dalinar stood aside for the king, but now he can't bear the guilt of going out with his brother's widow. So that's kind of a conflict and quite a funny one, especially when she turns up the heat and tries to seduce him, because Dalinar's very honourable and, you know, he'd never break his honour. And I quite enjoyed that bit. Dalinar's sections sound quite soap opera-y. Now, I've described them, but honestly, they don't come across like that in the book. It's all quite serious and slow. It's quite a slow burn, Dalinar's parts. And actually, I'd say that's true for the whole book. I think it is kind of a slow burn book. That's one of the main criticisms I see of this novel, is that nothing happens for the first 800 pages. That's not true, but that's the criticism I see. I would counter that by saying that I really enjoyed the slow burn, I enjoyed the ride, and things do speed up a lot at the end and they come together in an exciting way. And I was impressed with how Sanderson was able to pull all these threads together in a satisfying way. Seth we don't get as much of, but his scenes are very exciting because he's an assassin, so his scenes are usually like an assassination using his lashing powers. He doesn't want to be an assassin. He has this thing called an oath stone, and he has to obey whoever is holding the oath stone, and unfortunately it falls into the hands of some not great people. I had a hard time with that. I thought it was perhaps a bit unrealistic that Seth would commit absolute atrocities rather than break his oath, but it didn't spoil the novel for me or anything. But that was one of the sort of little sticking points for me, where I wanted a bit more of a reason for Seth to keep doing the things that he does. And now we're on to Shalon. So if you've read any of these books or you've seen comments or that kind of thing, you have probably seen that a lot of fans seem to have quite a negative opinion of Shalon. And I can only speak for myself. She did grate on me to start with. I'm not going to lie, she grated on me. Shalon wants to show off how clever she is. She wants to show off her cleverness. We're told how clever she is. The trouble is, her cleverness is often kind of like basic and cutting sarcasm, and it made me think of kind of like that friend you have in high school who wants everyone to know how smart they are in like every single situation and can't help themselves. They just can't stop saying things to point out how clever they are, and it just gets old after a while, especially when some of the things aren't that clever. However, Shalon did soften up and she did grow on me once she started her mission and became Yasna Colin Daniel's daughter's ward. I think ward is the right word here, apprentice maybe. She starts working for a woman named Yasna who has a fabrial, so she's kind of a rarity. She's also seen as a heretic, which I really like. I love a heretic character. I think that was very cool. I like that Sanderson did that. And Shalon wants to be a scholar, but spoiler, she also has a secret. She's actually there to steal Yasna's fabrial. And once we got into that and the interplay between the two of them and Shalon's guilt, and it was really actually a tough decision. I did not know which she'd choose, because she loved learning with Yasna and wanting to be a scholar, but she also needed the fabrial to help her family out of a really tight spot. So that really that grew on me as the novel progressed, and it had a very interesting ending as well. So I'm not going to write Shalon off completely, but yeah, just know that going in, that a lot of people don't seem to like Shalon's sections very much. Most of the negative things I've read around this book seem to have to do with pacing and length, and yet it is a long book. It is definitely an epic fantasy. I'd say at the start things actually set up fairly quickly, but then they meander a bit. You get more of that slow burn, especially as we go into lots of backstory and visions and that kind of thing. So it entirely depends on your temperament. If you're like me and you enjoy that kind of stuff, this is going to be a great read for you. If you find that stuff tiresome and you just want to cut to the action and the battle scenes, you could probably skip out like 500 pages of this book once you've read the start and go to the battle at the end. I don't know if it would make much sense to you. Now, Sanderson's prose is interesting because it's very see-through, and that's him saying that, not me. He writes in a way he doesn't want you to get distracted. He wants you to focus on the story. But I would say the description is very capable and paints a really clear picture of the world, but it's not really poetic, extravagant prose. It's more concerned about letting you enjoy the story, not standing in the way of the story or distracting from it. And I actually think that might be one of the factors contributing to the success of this book. Brandon Sanderson is Mormon, and there is a healthy dose of theology and religion in this book, which I actually really enjoyed. I find religion fascinating personally. I studied religion at uni and I like reading about fancy religions. I think Sanderson does a good job here of not letting his faith take over, of not really trying to indoctrinate anyone into anything, and presenting a fancy religion, but I would say it is one kind of veiled in Christian symbolism and mythology. Another real strength of Sanderson's writing is his imagination. There are tons of cool ideas in this, from Stormlight to Lashing to the Night's Radiant to the Parshendi to Spren. There are loads of cool magical ideas that feel real in the world, even when they're quite over the top. And I love the way people interact with them. Like their coins can be fused with Stormlight, so they can also use their coins as lights, which I just think is a really clever and cool idea. And there's loads of stuff like that in this novel, and he manages to make it feel all, even the really extravagant fantastical stuff, real and grounded. It reminded me a bit of George R.R. Martin, actually. That's something I really like about the Game of Thrones books, that these magical, fantastical things like dragons can feel real and gritty and grounded in this world. I suppose the difference between the two would be that Brandon Sanderson not only finishes his books, he finishes other people's books too. No shade to George R.R. Martin. So I would give The Way of Kings a very strong recommendation, bearing in mind a few of the caveats I threw in during this review. I'm going to keep going with the series. I think it will appeal to anyone who enjoys epic fantasy with really well constructed magic systems, deep world building, and a varied cast of characters. However, if you like the sound of all of this, apart from the length of the novel and the pacing, I'm reliably told that Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series might be the one to start with for you. Anyway, thank you for watching, and do hit like and subscribe because it really helps the channel. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have you read any of these books? Would you read one now based on my review? Yep, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.